Thanks everybody for coming out tonight. This is going to be our last talk for the season, obviously. We are doing this on Zoom as well as in person. So I'll go ahead and get us kicked off here. So Scott was a undergrad at BYUI. He started this project looking at moose behavior, and now he's a grad student at Idaho State University, and he's actually continuing this work. So this is kind of a preliminary, I guess, part of your work. And so with that, I'll let Scot Erickson take off.
Okay, yeah. So again, my name is Scot Erickson. This is actually a pretty big collaborative project with 30, 40 students over the past 4 years that have just kind of taken on different parts of the project. And about 2 years ago, we went out and decided to expand it to make it have a little bit bigger scope and more area so we can get cooler results, right? So I'm at Idaho State University, but we've actually gotten a lot of collaboration from the Idaho Falls Zoo. They're the ones who are funding all the field research for this. So they put a ton of money into local conservation and international conservation. So we're one of the beneficiaries of that. Okay, so outline of how I'm going to go through this talk. I'm going to start off, and I'm really going to try to sell you guys on how cool riparian ecosystems are. I don't think I'm going to need to sell you guys on it, but I'm going to do it anyways because all of our work is done along the South Fork of the Snake River. And after that, I'll give you a background of what are some of the things going on with moose right now in the West and what we know about moose both internationally and kind of locally. And from there, I'll move into the methods of the actual research I'm doing. So riparian ecosystems. If you talk to anyone who likes wildlife at all, especially with birding, I don't do much birding because I am horrible at identifying birds, but I have a lot of friends who do a lot of birding. And if I say, every time I ask, where are the birds? Where do I find them? They always say, go to the rivers, right? They're at the rivers, wherever the water is at, right? So riparian ecosystems are super cool because they allow for tons of wildlife everywhere to kind of just get there. They just support a ton of different wildlife of different types, right? One cool thing that riparian ecosystems act as is a wildlife corridor. Now, this next picture kind of explains better than words can explain what a wildlife corridor is. All the white on this map is privately owned land. All the yellow is Bureau of Land Management, so it's public, and then the green is Forest Service. All the other polygons are different, either NGO or state agency management units that are just kind of subsectioned after that. But you can see if a moose, for example, because we're talking about moose today, wanted to get from like Mud Lake or Camas National Wildlife Refuge or anywhere on the Sand Creek Desert down to the Palisades, they could either travel through a whole bunch of privately owned land, or they can travel through this nice little corridor along the South Fork of the Snake to get down there. These corridors they almost act as buffers to change for wildlife, so they can get into these areas and move if they need to move. But if those corridors are cut, and it gives them a lot of stress, right? It can change kind of how their populations move around. Because of that, I think I already kind of touched this a little bit, but lots of animals use these corridors. And within a riparian corridor, you add the fact that there's a ton of water. You have a lot of species that every species needs water, right? They're gonna come to these areas. There's also becoming a future, like a rising need for these riparian ecosystems to act as climate change sinks. And it's a fancy word. A sink has been a fancy word for a buffer for climate change. As climates are getting a generally more upwards temperature, these riparian areas add a lot of like cool shade for wildlife to use to escape the heat. And animals like moose that are very cold adapted especially need these areas. Riparian habitats are, I think as of now, they actually are now designated as the most, not fragmented, but endangered type of habitat in the world at this point. So moose are especially riparian habitat dependent. So we like rivers. Let's talk about the South Fork. Now this is the Henry's Fork Wildlife Alliance. We're going to talk about the South Fork a little bit. So the South Fork is a unique system biologically if you compare them to a bunch of other large river ecosystems. To start, the South Fork of the Snake River has the largest riparian cottonwood gallery in the entire West. It just means it's the largest contiguous cottonwood forest we have out in the West along a river corridor, which I said before, birds like rivers, they like trees. It's home to 126 bird species, and about a fifth of those are different raptor species. The Audubon Society has designated the South Fork of the Snake as an important bird area, which they just have a list of classifications an area needs to make for that. And something that's pretty cool about this area is about 2/3 of all the birds you see here are going to be neotropical migrants or migrants of other areas. So you have birds coming from out of the country. They come and hang out on the South Fork. So you want to protect birds on an international scale, you need to be protecting birds in the South Fork, right? You want to protect these types of habitats. And this GYE right here, Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, South Fork of the Snake is kind of expected to produce about a third of the bald eagles in that whole system. Obviously, the South Fork of the Snake has fish. This is a river, right? So outside of Yellowstone National Park, the South Fork of the Snake is, it supports the largest Yellowstone cutthroat trout fishery around this area. So if you want proof for that, go to the South Fork on the 4th of July and you can go people watching all day long, right? There's tons of people hanging out there. But if you absolutely hate wildlife, the South Fork of the Snake is still very important economically to Idaho and really the West. It's estimated that South Fork of the Snake brings in about $6 million from recreation and both local ecotourism and then international ecotourism. So people come to this area often to go visit Yellowstone National Park, but they're also going to come and hang out and probably see a lot of fish and some cool birds, right? So I think I have a deal here. Oh yeah, so there's estimated about 300,000 people annually that come and visit the South Fork of the Snake River. So there are some conservation issues that are going on pretty much around the whole world, right? There's always conservation issues, but these issues are not mutually exclusive to the South Fork of the Snake, but they are things that individuals have kind of mentioned are the larger issues we need to start considering when trying to think of really the riparian ecosystems in this area of the West as a whole. So to start off, invasive species, there's a lot of plants out there that are just being moved and maybe might be encroaching on these systems that are starting to change the habitats. I don't know a ton of figures and information to show about that, but it's happening and the landscape is changing at a rate that's probably faster than wildlife can like, really. So as more people recreate, we're going to have more human-wildlife interactions, and that's going to change both wildlife, I don't want to say their happiness. I don't want to anthropomorphize them, but wildlife don't like it, right? It's going to definitely affect how they go about their day-to-day. Water use and livestock grazing, both agricultural type effects on these areas are also starting to change these factors. And a lot of these factors are linked to anthropogenic effects, so human effects on these areas that can often just be traced that we have more people using the area, and we just started to think of ways to use it more responsibly, right? So are you guys sold on rivers? Do you like rivers? We're a big fan? Awesome. So let's talk about moose. I have a couple fun facts, and these fun facts are both fun, but they're also pretty relevant to the actual research we're doing here. So moose are the largest member of the deer family. Deer can be as large as moose, 7 feet at the withers in Alaska, or there's one smaller than the poodoo I've heard, but I've heard the poodoo is the smallest deer where they're about that tall, right? And we just have like a huge range of deer species around the world. But moose are by far, like they outpace the size of all other deer. In Idaho, we have a different subspecies of moose, which I'll touch a little bit later, but they're only 5.5 to 6 feet at the withers, so they're the smallest of all moose, which is still massive, right? Moose like to browse on aquatic plants. Now, moose are actually adapted to wet and marshy areas, and in Alaska, they're known to dive 18 feet deep into the ocean to the point where orcas even prey on moose sometimes. It's kind of rare, but I think that was first found out that moose do this because of a scuba diver who just saw a moose in the ocean, right? And can you imagine how terrifying that would be, right? I scuba dive, and I would not want to see a moose, so that would be pretty scary. But they'll dive down and they'll browse in these aquatic plants because probably not. I guess it bothers me, but but their snouts are adapted to basically close off in a different way that other ungulates can do that. So it functions more like a blowhole than other than other ungulates. And their snouts are adapted for a lot of things. They have prehensile lips that can grab trees and strip all the leaves off of them. So really cool adaptations. So, but these aquatic plants are out in some areas, like here, have like a perennial cycle. So during some parts of the year, like the spring and summer, a little bit in the fall, those aquatic plants are available. But in the winter, they might not be available, right? So they change their diets year round. And moose rely on olfactory cues for communication. Olfaction is another word for scent, smelling. So they're super reliant on scents to communicate. They live in pretty dense habitats, taken from this picture. It's just, I'm crawling through these areas, and as I'm crawling, there's a 6-foot moose just standing there quietly. I don't know how it got there quietly because I'm making noise, but they hang out in these super dense areas, and they have to get bearings on their surroundings based on scent pretty often. So moose are pretty well studied, right? I'm not here to tell you about a new species I just discovered, right? We understand quite a bit about moose, but most of the time when people think about moose, they're thinking of Alaska or Canada or Sweden, where their cars are made with a moose test, right? Where we know a lot about moose in a lot of places of the world, but moose in the U.S. are facing different problems that are probably likely to occur in those areas. So there's kind of a special need to look at moose separate from those locations, right? So this map right here is just a map of North America showing 4 different subspecies of moose. This is your Alaska Yukon moose, and then you have your tundra moose, and then your northeastern moose. They exist here. Maine has the highest count of moose of any state at about 50,000, and Idaho has the second highest at 10,000. So there's a pretty big difference in the size. If you think about how small Maine is compared to Idaho, right? So there's a ton of moose up here. You have these super cold areas. And this little spit coming down, this little peninsula of moose habitat, that's the shearus moose. And that's the moose we'll be talking about today. So again, this is the smallest of all the subspecies of moose, and it also has the most southern extent of any moose in the world. So if you think over to Asia, there are moose in China, but they don't, by latitude, they don't come quite down as far as they do in Idaho. So we have the most southern moose, right? So it's pretty cool. So in Idaho, moose are listed as a species of greatest conservation need. So every 10 years or so, each state comes out with a state wildlife action plan where they note species of conservation need and species of information need, which they make plans to try to, recover their habitats or make a note of some of the issues that need to happen or information you need to figure out about a species. So in the 2017 Idaho State Wildlife Action Plan, they were not on this list, but in the 2023 action plan, they were more recently put on. And I believe also in Wyoming, they're listed as a species of greatest conservation need. And Montana doesn't list them, but they have had a 10-year running moose recovery plan going on in the state. So in the West, some of these states, they have these statewide plans to try to deal with these issues that moose are facing. Idaho has the highest moose, not density, but it's the highest moose count of any other state in the West. The second highest, I think, is Wyoming at 5,000, but I think that number is often pretty close to Montana's, so it's kind of around that area. But still, again, nowhere near as much as we have in Idaho. Moose are pretty new in Idaho. There's a lot of settlers in the 1800s who came out here and never wrote down in their journals that they saw a moose, but they wrote down every other species they saw. So a lot of historians will think that moose have more recently migrated into this area from Montana, but again, that's kind of going off of some reports there. But moose populations have been rising pretty rapidly since the turn of the 20th century. So it's over the past 120 years, this population has been going up, and then about 15 years ago, suddenly that kind of leveled out, and now they're going down. So kind of halt, what's going on? How do we deal with this? Population's going down. I listened to a talk given at the Idaho Wildlife Society where this biologist talked about potential movements, but I don't think that's super known how much they move, because moose populations are hard to find. Again, they live in dense areas. You have to fly a helicopter over and just count them, and they might not be seen on that day, right? So pretty difficult to figure out. So let's go over some unknowns that relate specifically to the work I'm doing in this project. I mentioned before that moose are pretty reliant on olfactory cues. So they often scent mark. They're known to scent mark. They'll dig pits and urinate in them and then spread that scent all around their environment, try to signal to conspecifics where they're at during breeding times. But they're also known to rub on trees. Anyone who hunts knows you find the rubs. There's the elk rub. There's the deer rub. My friend is obsessed about rubs, right? Now I am. So, but moose also do rub on trees. But we don't really understand which trees they rub on and maybe why they select those trees. There was a study done 30 years ago in Alaska where someone figured that out for Alaskan moose, but those trees don't even exist here, right? So there's kind of a lack of knowledge of which trees they're using to rub on. And the research on behavior of this subspecies of moose in general is pretty limited because we have a ton of behavior of all the other subspecies. There's not as a huge need to figure out what's going on here, but especially is going on at these rubs. I have a whole moose textbook where rubbing on trees is mentioned as a side comment for one sentence in the book. I haven't read every word in the book, but I've looked everywhere where it would be mentioned. And it just always seems like a side thing. Oh, by the way, they rub on trees. That's it. So trying to figure out what the deal is here, right? It's kind of a more rare behavior that probably wouldn't be seen by a lot of methods of observation. So then that would explain that we don't really understand the importance of what these trees might be playing in the environment and how they use the environment to communicate. So I have three main questions I'm trying to answer with this research. One, pretty obvious one, which trees are they using, right? If we know which trees they're using, we can get a pretty good picture of how they're using the environment. Number two, what are moose doing at the rubs? A great way to do that is you can set up some cameras, right? A teaser until later in the presentation. And number three, how do those things tell us about how the importance of how they're using that environment, and if the environment were to change, how is that going to affect moose, right? So in our study area, we have all the cool animals, right? We have elk, we have both whitetail and mule deer, and of course we have moose in my moose study. And there's also mountain lion and coyotes we get on camera. That's an awesome picture. Someone put a collar up in the tree and got a mountain lion running up the whole tree, so pretty cool stuff. And of course, probably the most common animal in this area is humans. So that one is South Fork. So this map, this line is the South Fork of the Snake River. This is Forest Service owned land in the Big Hole Mountains. So you have Palisades Reservoir down over here. And the junction of the Henry's Fork to the South Fork is right around in this area with the Snake River proper going that way. We're right now up on the ceiling. We're in Island Park. So we subsampled just under 1,500 hectares of public area on the South Fork of the Snake River. And we chose three areas based on ease of access for us. We want to be able to get to the areas and how contiguous they were with water levels. So then we could access the whole area and kind of do our work in that area. We also chose areas based on if the public land was actually public the whole way through instead of like spotty with private land sections, so we could legally do the project, right? So in total, our three sites equal just under 300 hectares. So for each of these areas, we just border them by the river and by anthropogenic deals like roads, campgrounds. We just buffer those out by 100 meters just to maximize the size of our area, but also cutting out these human areas, right? I'm not really as interested in how moose are rubbing in the campground during the family barbecue, right? So each of the black lines are transects we placed 50 meters apart, which we then use for our first study, or our first part of the project to search for the rubs. So using just GPS on our phones during January to March, when leaves were still off the trees, we could see through the area easier. But after the rut, we walked through those areas and just searched for rubs. Rubs are pretty easy to find because they stood out quite a bit from the environment. Bark was stripped off, sap was oozing out of the tree. There's often hair lodged in the tree as well. So we just documented every single one. Didn't care about size, so some rubs way down here, some that were really tall. and we just knew where they were at, so we can go back later and start measuring them and figuring out which ones are the moose rubs, right? Both. Yeah. So it's actually been speculated by some other biologists that cows probably start all the rubbing first before the rut, and then towards the end of the rut, bulls will kind of pick it up to try to find the cows that haven't reproduced yet. But that's all speculation, right? So, but yeah, both sexes do rub on trees for sure.
Take their question.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's good. Yeah, so I guess the first question was, do bulls and cows both rub? Short answer, yes, they do both rub on trees. And what was your question again? Yes, so no one's documented that before. But the first picture on my presentation was with a cow and two calves. So we're seeing that. No one's written that in peer-reviewed literature. I'm sure hunters have seen that because they have millions of trail cameras out there catching a lot of cool information. But that's not something that I really understand. Probably a learned behavior, but I'll actually hit that more towards the end of the presentation. That's something that's new, right? So after we searched for all of our rubs, we noted that 95% of all the trees that were rubbed on were on Rocky Mountain or Utah juniper. That was like a super strong use for only those trees. As we were walking through the areas, we didn't see mostly Rocky Mountain juniper. It was mostly cottonwoods. It's the largest riparian cottonwood gallery, right? So a lot of cottonwoods, lots of willows, even lots of Russian olive, which is invasive, but just tons of other trees. And if they were using the trees based on the proportion of what was available, they wouldn't be only using juniper, right? So we did a T-square sampling procedure in all three of our areas, which basically what happens is we scatter random plots using a web tool. Each of these random points we mark and then walk to the nearest organism that we're looking at. So if we're trying to get the density of juniper or the density of cottonwoods, we'll walk to that tree, measure that distance, and then in a 180-degree circle from that, we walk to the next one. And you just plug these numbers into a formula, and it kicks out a density of that tree in this whole area with like errors, right? So I don't have these numbers on this presentation because I don't. That's the only reason why. But the short story is juniper are significantly less dense than any other tree. So we did this for density of all trees, juniper and cottonwoods as three separate variables. And juniper were less dense by like a factor of a couple thousand, maybe 10,000. So just they're using juniper when juniper are not the main tree by any means. So that was interesting to us. So from there, we needed to figure out which rubs we found were actually moose rubs. So they were identified with that previous study I mentioned 30 years ago in Alaska where they did find moose rubs, and this guy measured the height of the midpoint, the surface area of the rub, the length of the rub, the diameter of the tree at breast height, and a bunch of other characteristics. So we went to each of those rubs and we did all that. And based on our actual scent marked section, those characteristics, if they fit within one standard deviation less than the ones in Alaska, we called them a moose rub. Basically, their moose are taller, so ours should be a little bit smaller. So there's going to be a little bit of error there, but the idea was we want to cut out all the rubs that were used by deer so we can just look at the moose rubs. So we recorded all that for all the moose rubs, and then at each of those trees, we also placed plots to get local tree densities and took some shrub estimates, just 20% shrub density, 40% shrub density, and collected a bunch of other tree characteristics of that rub, such as like sex, first branch height, and if the tree was alive or dead, things like that, which we then did at 50 other random junipers we scattered in the area. So then we can compare the trees, the junipers that moose rubbed on versus the junipers that moose did not rub on, right? So those are all the methods for this part of the project. So I'm going to give you guys a bunch of cool results that we found now. After our 2 years of surveying for rubs, we found 174 total rubs. That includes everything from deer to moose. Out of all those, 60 of our rubs were used by moose, or we're assuming are used by moose. So out of these three areas, 60. We only had think 2 moose rubs here and 4 moose rubs in that area, and the rest were in our Twin Bridges area. And that's the area just by like Ryrie, if you guys know where Ryrie is. And so yeah, so there's a majority is in that Twin Bridges area, which is a much bigger area, so that makes sense. This is our first result where we're trying to figure out mathematically if moose are actually selecting juniper against what's available. So on the x-axis, we have our 3 categorical variables, which are just our study sites: the Lorenzo study site by Bear World, Twin Bridges by Ryrie, and then High C over just Rags by High C Hot Springs. If a number is greater than 0, because our selection ratios are log transformed, that means that the moose was selecting that type of tree against everything else. And then if it's less than 0, that means they were selecting against that type of tree. So if we're looking at juniper, in all 3 areas, moose were selecting for juniper, and they were selecting for them at a higher rate as we moved farther away from the mountains. So as we moved into areas where there's actually less juniper. And if we're looking at everything else, are they using everything else compared to the environment? There's a strong selection against. So bottom line, this just means that moose are very strongly selecting for juniper. And even if juniper densities are reduced, they're still trying to use those against everything else. Doing the surveys in the Bear World area was very difficult because I had to go find 10 random junipers. And I think I only found 20 in the whole blasted area. And there's just walking by, like, I already found that one. I can't do that one again. Right? There was not very many, and almost every single one of those trees was rubbed on. So really, really cool result there, because juniper encroachment is becoming a large issue in the West, right? So
how many other species of trees were actually rubbed?
We had 2 on narrowleaf cottonwood, 1 on peachleaf willow, 1 on a box elder, 1 on a river birch. So, and only 3 of those were actually moose rubs. So I think it was just the cottonwoods and the willow that was moose rubs. So
like softer or smellier?
It is really smelly. So that's actually the biggest, my biggest speculation I have out of this. It's the only aromatic tree in the area, and the trees that Boyer in Alaska, the trees that moose rubbed on when Boyer did that survey in Alaska, were the more aromatic ones as well. So juniper definitely has some qualities of those volatiles in the air, and then the smelliness of the tree, which are going to enhance their scent marking abilities. This hasn't been documented in moose, but it's been documented in other mammals. Like wildcats will select a different, like, shrubby juniper species to urinate on to mark their territory in Europe, and some other deer species do this on other conifers that are really smelly. So that's kind of my speculation. It kind of fits, right? But we actually have a future study. We're brainstorming right now. We're trying to figure out if that's actually the case with juniper. So more on that to come, right? So this next plot is the second main result of that first survey. On the x-axis, we have diameter at breast height. So that's the diameter of the tree at 137 centimeters off the ground. And that number, I don't know why that is specifically 137, but it's what everyone else in the literature uses. So we're all just going to use it, right? Y-axis is the probability of selection. So as the tree's diameter increases, the probability that that tree is going to be rubbed on increases as well. But there comes a point where the tree is large enough where it's actually starting, that probability goes down. Really interesting, because there's no real reason why we could think that a larger tree would be selected against, right? And when I was initially doing this study, I was trying to do a lot of linear models, and nothing was significant. And then we decided to do a logistic model that is quadratic, and it really is super strong correlation here. Say UC ranking is basically like, it's like a C+, but in nature, a C+ is really good. So a green line and the red line are the average size of tree we measured for both used juniper and then non-used juniper. So the size of the tree, like the range of trees we measured, were similar mean, but this suggests that moose are using trees in a much narrower range than what's available. Yeah.
Junipers really thick. The older they get at the bottom, maybe they can't get in there.
Yeah. So some of the trees, I'm climbing into them to measure these characteristics. Right. Well, yeah, no. So that's the thing is, you're right. These large trees will have super wide, like underbrush. Yeah, and like the bottom leaves are really wide. One thing that I'm not observing moose creating rubs. I'm just like watching which ones are already rubbed. But a lot of other people have observed them thrashing on trees, and they don't seem to care.
You probably said this already, but are they doing this like deer and elk seasonally, or do they do it all the time? Or
Yeah, so it depends on the species. So deer do this during the rut, and that's pretty well documented. It's definitely a rut behavior. Elk, hunters will see them rubbing year round, and that led to some other studies where elk are rubbing year round, but it's also kind of tied to the rut. With moose, it's always been speculated that it is only a rut behavior, and females will start early rut rubbing, and then males will pick up the slack, try to find the females that haven't yet reproduced. But that's something that there might have been a researcher in the 40s or the 50s who said this, and then someone else 20 years later cited them. And it's a very difficult behavior to document because they're often in these more dense areas. So it's hard for people to find it. So because we have motion sensor cameras now, we can actually figure that out. So that's actually the whole second half of the project is when are they doing this, right?
Deer and elk females don't rub, do they, or do they?
I'm not sure. I think that with elk, they both do rub, but
we always thought about the rub as being something to get the velvet off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something that is very commonly believed, and it's true, but also kind of not, right? It's both. It's both. Yeah, it's probably more like a side benefit. That's a good example. So when they're rubbing, it's around the same time of year that velvet is being shed anyways. So their velvet's probably falling off as well, right? But because we know that a lot of other ungulates are scent marking on these trees, and they're scent marking at the same time, it probably makes more sense for them to be doing this to communicate rather than just remove velvet, right? They could also be, get this crap out of my face, right?
Females are doing it. They're not going to rub that velvet off their
right, and that's what makes a lot of people think it's got to be more, right? Got to be more.
They're facing their neck, or they're rubbing their hind.
We're gonna figure that out. We don't know where they rub on the trees, but now we do, right? So I'm gonna recap this real quick before I move into the behavior because you guys are really excited to hit the behavior, right? So, yeah. So first salient result here: moose are selecting juniper to rub, and that's verifiable by selection ratio. Second salient result is moose are selecting very specific characteristics of those juniper to rub on. So they're not just rubbing every juniper, but they're trying to find the ones, or not trying to find them, but there are certain juniper that are, they're rubbing more, right? And that probably has something to do with how smelly the tree is. That's something that we're trying to figure out if we can test. There are some other, yeah.
What do you say to them?
Mm-hmm.
So tree smells. Is your scent?
Yeah, so it would definitely enhance their own scent, right? That's the reason why that's probably the case, because other olfactory mammals often will use smelly things to rub on or scent mark at or something, right?
So they're trying to
scat.
like perfume. They're trying to get some of it on them, or they're trying to leave their scent on it.
Leaving their scent on it.
Okay.
So they basically perfume themselves by urinating all over themselves. And there's a lot of really cool, yeah, it's super lovely, right? There's a lot of cool speculations out there about what their scents might actually be able to signal that we can't see, right? Maybe they have some kind of chemicals in their urine that could signal how fit they are, right? We don't know, but there's a lot of honest signals in wildlife research, like the blue-footed booby, how blue their foot is can signal how fit they are. Maybe there's something in their urine that can signal that, right? No clue. I have no idea, but it would be really cool to figure out, right? But yeah, so basically this lets us know how they're using the environment in a local way, right? So if we do something to the environment that changes this, we don't know what the deal is, right? So kind of the purpose of this. So I'm going to hush for about 45 seconds. You can watch this time lapse of a behavior that we got last year, which is pretty cool. So. Okay, so question for the class. Do males or females rub? Or do calves rub? All of them, right? That video didn't show males rubbing, but I can go right here and show you that a male rubs, right? Again, why are calves rubbing? Who knows, right? It's for yeah. So that's the thing that makes the most sense, right? Yeah, probably a learned behavior, right? Following mom does something, calves are learning, they're going to do that too, right? If rubbing is directly tied to rut and rut only, then if a moose is rubbing, they're going to be reproductively active. Yearlings or calves can reproduce at the earliest 9 months, so that's pretty rare. Normally, you're looking at 3 years before first estrus, so it's possible that they're actually just reproductively ready right after a year. But I have a photo I found last week, 2 weeks ago, where the calf was rubbing in June, so they had been born for 3 months maybe, and they're not ready, right? So that kind of threw that out the window a little bit, but still, there's a lot going on, a lot of variables that could be contributing to this. So the way all of our cameras were set up is we went to all those rubs we found in that first year, which in our first year we found 19, and the other 30, 20, 39, 29, 60 minus 19, the rest 31, I guess, 41. We got those all the second year. So last year we had 19 cameras up. This year we have 12 cameras up, and we set them all same height, same distance away from the tree with some variance, and all facing roughly north. So that way they're not facing east or west. So when the sun comes up, it makes the camera unusable, right? Just making that glare. And each camera was set up to take one photo every second whenever there's motion in the field of view. So if there's a blade of grass moving in the wind, we're getting every second of that, right? We're going through 16,000 photos in a day of a blade of grass moving. So we have to be pretty careful how we set these up. Sometimes the tree that the camera is mounted on is moving, and that's obnoxious, right? So, but for the most part, we're able to get quite a few good behaviors at the majority of the rubs for the entire study time. So if, talk about the speculation of the rut a lot, if the assumptions about when moose are rubbing and why they do this are true, we would expect to see that females are, before they're actually ready to reproduce, about a month and a half before that, they're going to start coming in and rubbing on these trees, right? Which we see that, right? We see pictures in August and September of these cows coming in and rubbing on the trees. And then towards the middle of rut, and then towards the end of rut, you're going to get an overlap of both male and female rubbing on the trees, but towards the very end, it will pretty much just be males trying to signal, hey, I'm here, like, go on a date, right? So we have October and then November. Peak rut is normally end of September, early October. I think in Alaska, it's September 29th through October 10th, and 93% of all reproduction happens in that 10-day period or 12-day period. Depending on other places in Canada, that number shifted by a couple of days, but it's a pretty tight window. Most reproduction is happening then. And then there's some outliers. There's even been an outlier as far out as February, but those are pretty rare, right?
So it's not a large movement of almost, evidently the people are posting on
They just had 2 killed on Highway 87 last week.
Yeah, they're moving right now, right? And not good for roads. Yeah, I mean, I'm actually not sure. Up on the bench, I'm sure there's maybe some shrubby ones, but I doubt there's the large Rocky Mountain. But they have other conifers, right? So other aromatic trees for sure. But we're also seeing rubbing happening in December and January and February. What are they doing there, right? That's weird. After February, we stopped recording because we were just collecting this data. We weren't going to start looking through it again. And we wanted to just get the rut. So we'd set them from August to February. And then in the end of April, early May, I went out to go collect those cameras after the snow melted because I was lazy. And I decided, we'll leave 3 of them running for the summer. And I'll just turn them on. I won't deal with them until fall, see what we get, right? Wow, they're rubbing in May and June and July. So they're rubbing 10 months out of the year, except for the 2 months I didn't have the cameras going. So they're probably rubbing every month out of the year, right? So this year we're not going to stop. We're just going to get it for the whole year. But they're rubbing every month out of the year. So that's super, I guess, novel, and it's interesting. Why are they doing this? But just to say that we can't like rank all these months as the same as importance, right? So we're going to plot this based on time of year, how often they're rubbing. So x-axis here for all 3 charts is just time starting from end of September up until mid to late February. First plot is just going to be number of events. We classified an event as when an animal is on camera and it's been at least 10 minutes since the last event. So if they leave for 10 minutes and come back, that will be a new event. And then we have total minutes that they were there. So instead of saying each event is worth the same, we're just going to count up the amount of time that's happening each day. And then bottom here is total minutes rubbing. So some events, they're not rubbing. They're just walking by, or maybe they're just hanging out. But if it was a rubbing event, where they're rubbing on the tree, that was put on here. So right here, this gray box is that peak rut time from September 29th through October 10th. So we're seeing very little activity before the rut. This is only with 3 cameras so far, so it's not all of our data, so this might change. But this is the trend we're starting to see. In pink is females, blue is males, and then black is either we didn't know the sex because their head wasn't on camera, or an event where both male and female are there at the same time. We're seeing a huge spike in number of events and the amount of time they're spending pretty much just in November. We're kind of seeing it start at the end of October and then ending at early December. And so far, there's not a huge difference between the time of year when male and female are. Again, male it's a pretty low sample right now, so that could change, but we're seeing most of the activity happening right here in November and a month after this prime reproductive season. Yeah, probably not, but low sample, right? That could change with more cameras.
That's definitely their
Good question.
You said 90%.
90% in Alaska, right? But there's been some studies where they don't think that would change based on temperature. So I initially was thinking maybe here they're breeding later because it's warmer later than in Alaska. But their breeding season is probably based on photo period. So when the light is going to start decreasing in the day, it would be a similar time of year here. It's more drastic in Alaska for sure, but the photo period would be similar. So
is this consistent with migration finding?
Kind of around. I think more of their migration from summer to winter habitats is probably happening somewhere closer to here, but that was a pretty local study I'm thinking of right now. But it was in Jackson, so it was close, but I'm not super familiar on the actual date for that. So
I had a question about what you told us at the very beginning, how the river's the corridor. Have you guys thought about putting a camera, or have you already put a camera like where the snake crosses like Highway 20? Because they would be coming through there if they're following the river.
So the Lorenzo, yeah. So the Lorenzo area is that crossing. We don't have cameras there because we don't know how to get to that area for the entire season without having our Corollas stuck in the snow and in that garbage parking lot right here. So we didn't set any cameras on. We only found one real moose rub in that area, but I wanted to set a camera there, but in this time of year, the snake's too high to cross. And this time of year, I can't get to it. So I would only get about a month of activity with my garbage car. So that's that's something I wanted to do though, see if there's a difference by area. But what was your question back there?
How many moose do you think are using the area?
Yeah, so we are, every time I see an event, I'm classifying that moose with a name. It's bull 1, bull 2, bull 3. Bulls are easy to identify. The antlers look different. Cows are very difficult and it's probably not realistic. Right now I have 60 cows. I probably have 25 cows. But every cow at this point I'm just saying is a new one. And then later I'm going to look at the photos on the wall and just like a conspiracy theorist try to put them together. Right, yeah, Sandra and... Yeah, so there are some tools out there. They're expensive. So I haven't really given it too much thought just because I'm broke. But but there are some tools. I think they'd be good for bulls. But because often the cows walk in and then they leave, they don't turn around. If they have a patch on one side and on the left, but they walk in on the right, if you don't see that patch, you wouldn't have that classifier. So that's the issue I'm coming to right now is I see a cow and I'm like, I don't know, that back right leg has a patch, but there's a back left with a similar patch, but it's a different leg. So that's where cows are difficult. My current estimate is probably 20 to 30 cows that are using this area. And then right now I have 7 bulls counted. And that's only with the 3 sites we have data for. So this is only 3 sites. We don't have the other 19 sites put in yet because there's 4 terabytes of photos we're looking at. So there's a lot of work we're trying to put in. So that's a good question though, because eventually we want to see if certain animals have fidelity to rubs. So if this is a rub that's for the most dominant bull and they have to fight over that area, that's something that hasn't been looked at for moose before, but some other ungulates will lek, kind of like sage grouse do. They'll say, this is my spot, this is my spot. So these rubs, we're kind of starting to think that they might act as a similar like lekking strategy. So
take those gray bars off, though. They totally screw up our hypothesis.
well, that's good though, right?
Still your work.
They are. So they're not invasive. So they are native, but they're encroaching, right? So they're treated as invasive, right? That's not new either. That's something that people have brought up concerns about for the past 80 years, right? So yes, is the short answer. But moose are also using them. So they belong in the area, but the fact that the landscape is changing super rapidly because of how we're changing how water is being used has been tied to juniper encroachment. If you're going to be a manager and go and remove all the juniper, which is a pretty common thing to do right now with Fish and Game, go and take this area. We want to save the yellow-billed cuckoo, keep the cottonwood stands good, take the juniper out. Maybe leave the ones that are the tight, narrow gap that moose like to rub on, right? So there's ways this can be implemented into like land management strategies, but again, this is like new data. We need some more information to have that kind of impact, but for sure. But they are not liked by a lot of folks. So they'll move on from this. Yeah.
In terms of identifying, you said 60 cows out there, and you're not sure if you really have 20 or 60. You said that sometimes they would be paired. Can you use analysis on
You could for sure. That's really outside the scope of my knowledge because it is costly. Yeah. So right now I'm in a course at ISU. I'm looking at isotopes. So using hair to make a model of what their forage is, and that's work I can do with the hair that's on these rubs for sure.
You put some collars on these.
That's the best thing. So there's a bunch of collars up by deer parks. All the moose up there are collared and tagged. And Fish and Game biologist told me that some of those moose do go down into the Lorenzo area, which is why I really wanted to put cameras on those. But again, I can't get in there for half the darn season. So that would be really cool if we can get colors on those, or just like pit tags or something with a radio transmitter. That would be the best option. So, but the issue with hair DNA also is these moose leave a lot of hair, and if I go and then 2 weeks later I come back and there's a lot of hair and 3 moose were there, it'd be hard to tell which one is who, right? So I'd have to get kind of lucky on that, or check it every day, which if I walk to the rub every day, I would be changing. Moose can be like, I'm not going here anymore. This guy is ruining the vibe, right? So we're not only looking at moose though, like we're really looking at moose, but we want to see how other species are overlapping or interacting with these areas as well. So we're tracking every other large species, right? The only bird we're looking at is turkeys, just because we have a ridiculous amount of turkeys on these cameras. But it's just kind of fun. It's kind of fun to watch them. So, but first plot is number of events again. In green is deer. So you can look at just visually, you can see that deer are there a lot, right? But if you look at it by minutes, moose are definitely using these areas more than anything else by far. So we haven't seen any deer rubbing on any of these juniper. So that was actually one of our questions, that I would like to set some cameras on some of the smaller ones we found. Like, see if deer rubbing these, they're not rubbing these.
Are you seeing any human problem on juniper?
Sometimes I do, right? Sometimes I like to leave my scents all over these, for sure. There's a couple of photos where I'm like smelling it or something, and someone's like, why are you rubbing on that? So sometimes I do, but we see lots of hunters and fishers walking by the exact same game trails that this use. So there's one of the students at the Idaho chapter of the Wildlife Society did last year, they did a poster where they looked at number of events and compared it from like moose to humans. And they noted that at rubs where there was a lot of human use, there were lots of moose use, and rubs that had neither. Also, like there was a pretty strong correlation there, which is really weird, right? Why would moose go to where there's more humans? They're probably not following the humans around. The humans are probably following the moose around because they're making game trails that are really easy to walk through. And then the moose are just, 5 times, 10 times the weight of a human, so they don't care, right? Like I can stomp on you. So there's probably, it'd be cool to see if temporally there's going to be any differences of maybe how moose use the areas during the hunting season or not, or maybe how deer get punked out of certain areas. So we're going to start looking at this data in the future. This is just meant to show you how messy it can all look, right? It's hard to read, and it is. So those are priority number one. We're going to look at the whole ecosystem interaction for sure. Yeah, it's crazy. Oh, we have an event that it's not plotted on here because I just haven't gone through that camera yet. But rub number 13, there were 9 hours where there were 3 different moose on that day, that night. Just at one point, all 3 at the same time, which there's no space on a rub for 3 moose. Two of them were bulls, so they had big old antlers. They don't care. They're probably getting poked in the eye and everything, just rubbing on this tree. And then the camera stopped recording at the 9th hour. So it could have been more, right? So it wasn't continuous. They would like go for 3 hours and then leave for an hour and come back. But yeah, so that when I plot that, this is gonna look ridiculous. So everything else is gonna be, yeah, like they're just, these rubs are basically the bar of the woods. We're all gonna hang out here. Yeah, they don't reuse it probably, right? But they're using the same rubs year to year. That first photo that is on the introduction screen where there's a cow and 2 calves rubbing on it, that rub was the same rub that the initial student 4 or 5 years ago found and got pictures of them rubbing on. So they're like reusing the same rub, which there was a study in Russia where this guy straight up said moose don't reuse rubs. Well, they do here, so just new information. Probably, right? Well, we found a hunter packing out a moose at one of the rubs, so we probably did that. So this ethogram was taken from a study where they experimentally infested some moose with ticks to see how their grooming changes based on ticks, and then we oversimplified it. They had 40, 50 locations, like left, right hoof, and then the shin bone and everything else. So we oversimplified this. So we're actually going to use this same type of classification for every single photo we look at. We're giving that photo a behavior. We can start looking at behaviors of events and then how that changes over time. And then maybe it's different by sex or age class and even location. So if, based on the tick study, if they're rubbing because of ticks, which is becoming a huge problem in the East and starting to be more of a problem here too, they're rubbing a ton in this area under their bellies, and they're also using their legs and just grooming themselves there. But they weren't really rubbing any different if they had ticks or not on their heads, right? So remember that for, it's right here. This is super preliminary data. This is from 2 years ago using only one location. It's because we haven't started putting in the new behavior from the new years yet. But forehead, right on top, neck, post-orbital would be the eye, but like right behind the eye, and then preorbital right in front of the eye, and then snout just right in the front, right? We separated the post and preorbital as this cheek classification, so it's just anything on the side of the face. And the reason we did that is there is a gland, I think it's preorbital, I have to remember. There's a gland that's preorbital for a lot of ungulates, and it's probably there for moose too. So I wanted to see if maybe they're rubbing that gland more than anything else. If you remove antlers from bulls, there's probably not a huge trend in difference between sex. We kind of calves as like a separate sex in this scenario, but this is, again, a pretty small sample size. But we're doing this kind of proportional survey with not only rubbing behaviors, but every single thing they're doing. So if they're copulating or fighting or walking with their head up or walking with their head down, and we're going to look at how that's going to change over time, and then even how it changes throughout the event. So if they are approaching a rub, what are the things they're doing at the beginning of the event versus how are they rubbing towards the end? Is there a difference? And we're just going to just try to just classify it in as wide as possible so we can see any trends, right? So I don't have a good result for you here now because we don't have that result for a year and a half. So what's next with this project here? One, we're going to keep getting behavior. We have 12 cameras set up right now, and we're going to keep those up all the way until the next fall. And we're just going to keep gathering all the school behavior. Some girl just gave me back a flash drive. She was going through some photos today, and she said, "Oh, we got calves rubbing on this tree, which we haven't seen calves on that tree yet." So I was like, "Oh, sweet, more new information." She also got fighting at the same area too, so that was pretty cool. So we're just keep getting a ton of behavior, right, and try to separate that into different categories and see what they're doing. At one of our rubs, we have a acoustic detector set up where it just records a minute of sound every 5 minutes. And that's at that rub that gets the most activity. And we want to start looking into classifying some of their calls and seeing if that's going to also be able to be plotted over time and see if there's a difference in when they call and how they call. That's going to be, this is more of like an introductory, see if this gets us any cool results. And if it does, we're going to try to really dive into that. And then we've also played with drones a little bit. That there's issues with laws of having to see the drone at all times, and it's a pretty dense area, so it makes it pretty difficult. But using thermal imagery, we're able to fly at 400 feet, and we've tested this where we could tell what a moose is versus a deer or anything else, just based on the shadings and how they give off heat on their necks. So with drone work, which is becoming way more popular with population monitoring for agencies of other species, it could be super useful for moose, because right now the ways we monitor populations of moose are pretty inconsistent because there's not really a good way to do it. If you use a different kind of helicopter, then you have to change the whole method. Like it's tough. So drones, if we can figure this out, that would be super useful for future population monitoring. And then why does it matter? I think you guys all care about moose and you guys all care about animals. I don't have to really wax philosophical here, right? But once again, moose are a species of greatest conservation need in these two states, Idaho and Wyoming. So like legally, there's definitely a requirement from the state to work on these habitats and support these populations of moose. But it's important for us to better understand how moose are using the habitat if we want to make good plans about that habitat. Whenever any kind of development plan goes through, there's that NEPA process that requires that we understand the impacts of wildlife and habitat use. And this information can really play into that for sure. This last statement right here, natural history is nature's glue. There was an article that came out by a biologist named Joel Berger last year, and he was talking about the changes in how biology is being done over the past couple decades and how as more sophisticated models come out, more experimental studies are being more popular. There's a worry that us as humans, we're losing our connection to nature, right? And these types of studies where we're just watching them, what are they doing, and what tree are they rubbing on, are starting to become less popular, so to speak, right? Just because, like, wow, it's just a fun fact. Why do you care? But this type of stuff is what glues us to nature. He says that natural history, or like the research basically is observational studies, watching what are they doing, when are they doing it. That's what glues us to connect us to nature, and which is what makes us want to be out here all the time, right? We want to be out here because it's fun and it looks cool. We see a lot of cool stuff. So, but yeah. So again, this is a really cool collaborative effort. I'm the guy talking here, but there are 30 other students behind me that have just been working and putting in, dozens and hundreds of hours and getting all this data that I could not get on my own because of one guy. So super useful. And then Fish and Game and BLM biologists have also collaborated with ideas, bouncing ideas back and forth. And once again, Idaho Falls Zoo, a quarter of all their admission funds go to their quarters of conservation program, which goes to international conservation projects. There's another quarter that goes to local projects. So it's funding projects like this, and then a couple other projects on endemic plants and bats and Great Basin spadefoot. So there's a lot of cool things happening with conservation for them. So yeah, I think there's a question. Raise your hand. Oh, okay. But yeah, so I'll take any questions. That's the end of the presentation for sure.
Do you see them sniffing a lot?
For sure, yeah. That's actually one of the, I have a behavior for sniffing and a behavior for licking their lips and a behavior for licking the rub. Yep, also some phlegming for sure, yeah. That's one where I've had to take a pause on how I'm classifying behaviors, because as I keep doing this, I keep finding more. I'm like, God, shoot, was that last one that? So right now I'm watching everything, and then I'm making a list of behaviors, and then I'll go through and start inputting it. So we are seeing phlegming though at the rubs. That's cool.
I'll go ahead and ask a few of the questions.
Yeah.
So the first one is, he's asking, is there a reason our moose up here are a slight different member of the deer population? I think he's talking about, because he asked when you were looking at populations of moose, so I think he's asking why they're separate.
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah. I'm going to go back to that slide. Do I have a mouse on the screen? No, I can't. Okay, so the way moose got to North America, came across this land bridge over here from Russia, and they kind of started coming down, and as ice, they would have like been way down here, and then as ice started to recede, moose populations moved upwards pretty far. But this area where Shiras moose persist now, that they didn't recede as much, right? So then these areas, they just went up farther, and they're like the remnants of the moose that used to exist in a more southern region. And that's kind of gone back and forth. Like I said, in Idaho, moose are probably pretty new in the past 200 years, just because of like maybe not seasonal, but migrations that happen on like a century basis. So I don't know if that really answers that question very well, but
I think that was good.
Yeah.
I guess I'm going to dump that a little bit. So like all your historical moose stuff is off of people's reports.
Right.
Is there any fossilization, any bones, anything on riverbanks or that?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I can't answer that. So
his next question is why is there such a pushback to wildlife safe passages? And he asks overpasses or not in this area of Congress.
I think that it's just because they're very difficult.
They're everywhere. So.
Yeah. I think it's the same reason it's pushed back for a lot of things. It's just difficult, right? And there's a lot of factors to play into here. So I think for a short answer, that's probably good without me getting super political here, right? But
so he does mention overpasses or tunnels, like that would be better for moose.
I have no idea really. I don't know. I don't know a lot about the science of overpasses and tunnels and the differences and how they're set up and infrastructure. So
I know in Banff they pick them up under underpasses. well as overpasses, so there's no reason to think.
Right.
Yeah.
Moose are great grazing. They would probably use whatever they want.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
You'll probably see the overpass made for them and be like, can't tell me what to do.
How are you overlaying migration in your study? Like, if the peak rubs, maybe it's just because that's when they're massively
Right.
passing through that spot back and forth.
Right. That's actually a good thought that I don't know how to address it yet. Right. But that's something that I've been thinking about for the past like 2 months. Thinking we know that they move seasonally. The difference between summer and winter ranges, like the areas that they occupy, could be like winter they could be occupying 5 to 10 kilometers ish. It's a pretty loose number here, right? And then summer ranges could be 4 times larger than that, right? But how they're moving through the corridor, that could be squished and spread out, right? So seasonally, as they move up and down, I would have expected that we just wouldn't see very many moose in that area in the summer because they can go and hang out in the Big Hole Mountains. But because we're seeing them in the summer, and I'm also seeing like a cow with a calf that will be there for 4 months, like not moving, I wonder if the same migration is going on here. I don't know. I really have no idea. But that's something that would be super important to put in if we can get those moose collared, right?
Tim Swearingen much?
No, I don't know, Tim.
Yeah, he's IDFG. He talked, what was that, 2 months ago?
Okay.
And he was talking about some moose migration that they see here. And one thing that he pointed out that was really interesting is that they have moose that stay placed and they have other moose migrating right through their home ranges.
And
And
this,
so there's this interesting
Right.
animals that they don't migrate at all. They're just there.
some just hang out. That's cool. That's interesting. Which field office is he?
Snake River.
Okay. I know a couple from the Salmon and Montpelier, but.
Yeah, he manages Snake River.
Oh, okay.
I mean, he's more the same.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I bet he probably bounces stuff off of Josh Rydalk. He's doing he's at EFG, but he's over like Deer Parks, but pretty close to that area.
The snow load down there on the South Fork should be a bit less than what we have here.
Mhm.
So I don't know, what's the typical snow load in those areas? Something that they would not migrate.
It wouldn't. It's not really deep enough for it to really inhibit them. I think that moose only start to have a negative effect with snow once it gets to about 3 feet, 2, 3 feet is when they start to have to use more energy than they probably want to move through the snow. So I don't know if the amount of snow would really change how they migrate here versus Island Park. Could be wrong though, but just because I know we can get a high snow load here, but I'm not certain on the numbers.
You know how you said for your bulls you were able to check them? Have you noticed in the years that the same bulls are in the area?
So I don't know yet because I only have 1 year of data put in yet so far. But the issue with that is going to be the antlers look different the next year. I'm not going to know if it's the same. So that would be where having a color would be.
So we have here community moose collection. So there's a mom and 2 calves. She was there last year. And so that's why I was wondering if like you were talking about, do they migrate or not? We have seen her more this summer than we did the last 2 or 3 summers.
Right.
And it's amazing to see that transformation. So I haven't seen anybody rub on a tree, but I know they strip my trees, which is fine because that's what they're there for, so I can see them.
Right.
But when you consider that, I mean, how often, and this I guess is just the future, is how often does a moose stay in the same summer area? I mean, maybe she's, I don't know, we stopped seeing her mid to late September.
Right.
But she'll be back June 4th.
So
You know what I mean?
yeah, so in terms of, I'll kind of repeat that a little bit for the Zoom. But question is about like length of summer versus winter migration, like times or home ranges, right? So there was a master's student actually at University of Wyoming who did his thesis on moose migrations in 2008, and he documented the different. This is the study in Jackson I briefly called to earlier, but he looked at just the size of their relative home ranges in summer versus winter and looked at when they moved. I don't remember the date, right? But there was a distinctive, like this is the day which they're all moving, and then they came back. And over the 2 years, that date was the same, right? So for those migratory animals, for migratory moose in this area, like they're probably going to have that a similar effect where they're going to hang out in this large area in the summer, and then they're going to move to their winter area, and they're probably going to go back and forth, right? And that could be, changed by what plants they're eating and other things. So
You need like collar and ear tag sponsors.
yeah, that'd be cool. I don't even know how to even go about doing that. I know I have to work at the Idaho fishing game, but yeah, that would be the coolest thing ever. Yes, the answer.
If that species is considered, a species of most concern,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that IDFG does collaring of like pronghorn and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and they were doing it very heavily actually years ago. Why they wouldn't
So-
be interested in doing that?
So they do that with moose. So Josh Rydock has told me that in his area, almost every single moose he thinks, so he's like he's tried to get every single one either ear tagged or collared. So he's able to look at how they're moving, and that was why it would be really cool if I can get a camera either in that area where he doesn't have juniper. So that would be really cool to see what they're rubbing on in the total absence of juniper. But they also, some of them do go down to the red zone area. So I had to figure out a way to either getting the solar panels on the cameras so I don't have to change batteries or something like that. So trying to play with that. That would be a really cool way to expand the range of this for sure.
One more question.
Yeah, I'll do this one real quick.
No.
Yeah.
So you're talking about cameras.
Yeah.
You're using like a game camera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, stealth cam.
You have to actually go out, like, to get the data.
Yeah, that's a lot of the work that's being done by the students. Is we just have teams of every week. All the cameras are just SD cards and batteries are switched out.
Wow.
In the winter every week. In the summer they can go a month or two for sure. But right now we're at 2 weeks, and once that starts dipping below freezing.
So it's cellular one, probably a lot easier.
Yeah.
Areas you can't get.
But the amount of photos we're getting with the cost of we're filling up a 32 gigabyte card every 2 weeks almost. So 16,000 photos per camera per switch.
If you get better cameras though, you can adjust it so the cameras can discern between wildlife and grass.
That's actually an interesting thought. We have cheap ones, so right, yeah. But yeah, so yeah, if we can reduce that would be cool.
So we have 3 moose visiting our little village
Mhm.
in the last couple of weeks. Female with like a year calf, and now we have a bull moose that's come back twice.
Nice.
So he's looking for love, but he's a magnificent male, and we've been stalking him a little bit, like in our car from a distance, and in order to get his head up and from eating the willows and that, my husband's been like making funny noises, and I would just really like not to hear that you don't know. I would like to hear you offer a moose call because we're just burning the hell out.
I don't even know.
And then he eats, and so whatever noise it is we're doing,
Well-
although he liked me squeezing, he paid attention.
What you should do is go on YouTube and
Oh.
play the call.
Don't be cheap. You need to
No.
Oh.
Okay. One more time.
No, I did it once. That's it. So you got your one, and it's not even accurate, so it doesn't matter. With Moose Acoustics though, there was a paper that came out 2 years ago where they went on YouTube and they found as many moose calls as they could find, and they classified them using it wasn't Kaleidoscope, it was a different just sound analysis software tool, and they're able to see the differences in like frequency between male and female. So you can do cool things. You should record that moose, and you should send me the sound, right?
Walking by one time, got audio of it,
Yeah.
by it was quite bizarre to hear them. It's like, that's what they sound like?
No, I've heard them once when I was out there switching cameras, and I was like, all right, get out of here. They were fighting. There's like 3 of them right around me. I'm like, nope.
So you're getting all these images, are you using some kind of technology to weed out what you don't need so you guys can go in and focus?
That technology is the 30 BYU Idaho students that are helping. So that, I said, there's a girl who gave me a flashlight backup data. They're all filtering. So I have a protocol of you're going to delete every photo that doesn't have an animal in it. So when I go through, I can just hold the thing. I can see the events and
So somebody is doing that for you or technology?
person, people, the students are just delete. So yeah, there are AI tools. So like Earth AI, you can do that. You have to pay for that. And there's a student at University of Idaho who he posted on Reddit. I found this. It blows my mind. First semester student. He built a program to identify animals. And I tried to use that, and it didn't. It kept thinking the rub was a person. So he trained it without a rub, right? So he trained to be able to pick up moose, and that rub didn't work. So, but there's other ways where you can use free software to train with machine learning to figure that out. Computers to me are just over my head. So I'm trying to learn that aspect. I have a brother-in-law who is into machine learning, so I'm trying to get him to help me with that.
Is there any correlation between the rubbing?
Is there a correlation between when the moose do their rubs and like other animals? Or do they follow other animals? I'm not
Yeah, so that's this plot right here. Correlation, I haven't tested for that yet, but we're going to be looking at this, right? And then we'll probably test in between individuals. So like what I said before, we saw a correlation between humans and moose at the same area. That they were accessing the same areas. We wanted to look at that between all other animals, right? Seeing,
probably hunters following. Unless
probably exactly a hunter following the game trail, right? That would be a perfect reason for a correlation. But I don't know an answer for that yet. So. Right, and then all these like deer, turkey, coyote, mountain lion. We're gonna look at all that, but we just don't have that put in yet for sure. Yeah.
We have Steve online.
Sure.
Steve, you can go ahead and unmute and ask a question.
Maybe you say it.
Oh yeah, Steve, you can go ahead and unmute.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I was in between the chat and watching the graphics. So is there any correlation in between the so in the graph you've got turkey, human, dog, deer, and moose, but up here in Island Park, there's that one demographic of bear that is missing from this. And I'm just wondering if the rubbing, because it occurs year round and the bears hibernate, some of them do for, some of the year. If the rubbing is a way to show the bears when they do come out that, no, this is not your territory and you should not be coming in here. I don't know. Is there a correlation between what the moose are doing with their rubbing, not just for, sexual activities, but just to like what you have in the graphs, but bears specifically? That's my question. I am so sorry.
No, you're good. Thank you. That's a good question. So bears specifically, I have no idea. We don't have bears in the study area. I mean, the range overlaps that. I've never seen a bear in the study area. So if they're not grizzlies, if there's anything, it would probably just be black bear. But that question about rubbing not being tied to a sexual activity, like this plot right here, that's where I'm kind of, because you don't have activities right at the rut, I'm starting to kind of speculate that this is probably signaling a lot more than the rut. So that could be something that, it's plausible, right? They could be signaling to both conspecifics and then other species about maybe territorialism or like, deer, this is my rub, get out of here, right? And that's something that it's all just in the air speculation. I have no idea. But there have been, like, ungulates have adapted to not get eaten, right? So that could be something that could be an adaptation to be like, no, we'll step on you, bear, right? So that's right. So maybe they're starting to be active when they're going to sleep, right? I have no idea.
How does that play, how does what you're finding play with the international elsewhere?
So rubbing activity like this hasn't been documented. It's something where it's normally we're observing moose fighting, and then side note, we saw them strip the bark off the tree and rub on it. But actually analyzing this, like the rubbing as its own separate activity with a detailed study, this hasn't been done. So can't really be compared to an international case because I don't know. So at least in North America, I'm not certain about maybe like Norway and Sweden, but I haven't seen details in there. So
Have you seen the bulls rubbing when they still have velvet on their antlers, like when it's still in the growth phase?
there are pictures out there of that. I haven't seen it. Well, that's actually not true. Last week I saw it, but before last week, when I saw that photo where that bull has it's really hard to see because it's super small, but he's got his spike right here. Then I saw it then. So, but all the activity around the rut, we're seeing bulls coming in. Like I didn't see any bulls in August, September, when you would expect them to be removing their velvet. I was seeing all the bulls during like the fall afterwards. But again, I just broke that rule by by seeing that. Yeah.
Ever see them shed their velvet?
In person, no, or even on camera, I haven't. It is drop it all.
Yeah, I watched it one time, and you see a little bit of red in the velvet, and then it's like it all sloughs off.
Wow, that's cool. I've seen all the pictures where you just have the velvet hanging over their face, and it's pretty. I haven't seen any yet, but it's all over. I'm not going to tell you because I want to find them. So. Not one of any species. Ticks me off. I think it was during that shed antler closure, so I bet people went in early. But,
All right, guys, we probably have time for one more question. Anybody else have?
Well, let's have to rub it. I found a new shed.
oh my gosh. Wait, thanks guys. Yeah.